Hi everybody, my name is Bill Dolman. I'm an assistant professor of practice in sports media and communications, and I'm honored to be the host today and welcome you to the 2026 Seline Lecture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's College of Journalism and Mass Communications. The Seline Lecture series engages journalism innovators and thought leaders on challenges critical to the industry. This is made possible through the generous endowment of the Seline family, a family headed by S. Allen and Kathleen D. Seline. Mr. Seline was a U.S. Air Force major who served in World War II and went on to a career in banking. Mrs. Seline enjoyed a long career at Creighton University, eventually working as an administrator in health sciences. They were mom and dad to Steve, Nancy, and Rex, and they had no connection to the world of journalism until Rex studied journalism and graduated from UNL in the 1970s. His daughter, Libby, is a 2021 graduate of this college. When his father passed away, Rex and his mother wanted to honor him, and they founded the Seline Memorial Lecture Fund that would support an annual lecture at our College of Journalism and Mass Communications, or as we refer to it, the COJMC. The Seline Lecture has become one of the highlights of our academic calendar each year, and its mission is threefold: to inspire Nebraska students to realize they can accomplish great things, to give students and the community a chance to meet speakers of national stature and learn from their experiences, to remind students that it is important to give back to the communities that nurtured them. And our speaker today personifies all three of the Foundation's missions, Paula Levine. She's a Gretna native, and she earned her Bachelor of Journalism degree from Nebraska in 1998, master's degree from Creighton in 2009. Now, while in school here, she not only worked at the Daily Nebraskan, she basically lived there, she told me, growing from reporter to the editor-in-chief. Her first job was as an education reporter in St. Joe, Missouri, followed by reporter positions in Tacoma, Dallas, Des Moines, and all that in the first decade of her career. In 2008, despite, as she admits, having no professional experience in sports, she was hired by the worldwide leader in sports, ESPN, where she has been for the past 18 years, covering domestic violence, white-collar crimes, health and safety stories, sports gambling, including a gambling story on Little League sports in Florida. She notably covered and exposed the sexual assault scandal in the Baylor football program and has written extensively about it and similar issues in the sport. Simply put, Paula Levine has become one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. One of her classmates at the COJMC and the Daily Nebraskan was Jeff Zeleny, now the well-known chief national affairs correspondent at CNN. He said of Paula, quote, "I'm in awe of the journalist she has become, but I am not surprised." And we are pleased to welcome Paula Levine back to the COJMC. Paula, thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right, we're going to have a little conversation here at the desk, and later on we're going to open up the floor to some Q&A with Paula. But the first question I have for you is, what's it like for you to come to the COJMC and look up on the side of the building and see the College of Journalism and Mass Communications after all these years?
It's always an honor to come back here. I love being involved. I've been involved with the Dean's Advisory Council. I like having a role in making sure that this college, upholds all the standards that we had when I was here, and just seeing, you mentioned Jeff Zeleny, just seeing all of the amazing journalists that this college continues to produce, and the importance of having it as a college of journalism. I mean, there is something to be said about being able to come back here and have this distinguished facility to be able to say, like, we are producing journalists, we are producing people in the journalism communications industry, and the effect that our alumni have had because of that pride and because of that sense of an established college is pretty impressive. I mean, that you name every major publication, PR firm across the country, and there's a COJMC graduate there somewhere.
What attracted you to journalism in the first place before you even arrived on campus? And obviously you fell in love with it because you spent 5 years at the Daily Nebraskan. And what do you enjoy about it still to this day?
Well, aside from the fact that there was no math requirement to major in journalism, so maybe I should be so honest about that. No, I knew when I was in high school that I wanted to be a journalist. Like and what really, everybody's drawn to journalism, I think, for different reasons, whether they want to tell stories, they want to be creative, they are interested in the human condition. I have done work that has reflected all of that, but what really drew me was the ability to be a watchdog, to know that this was a job that I could be in, in which I could hold people in power institutions accountable. And I was inspired with that just in the basic classes I had in high school, and then coming here sort of really, and right when I first came here, I think I had a bunch of different ideas about what I wanted to do. There was a brief flicker of time when I was like, I want to go work for Rolling Stone, right? But that was, I just sort of knew that the real passion that was driving me was really more toward the accountability, more toward the investigation, more toward, and then eventually getting into data journalism, much in credit to one of the professors here, Matt Waite, who I've known since high school. But that aspect of, what we call now like holding truth to power, and doing that type of work, like that has been what's really inspired me. And then bringing that into a sports context, you were listing all of the topics I sort of went down on sports, and I joke with people when they ask me, well, what do you do at ESPN? And I'm like, well, I ruin sports for people, right? But I like to say that those stories, although controversial, they hold this massive industry accountable. And to defend that, I say, if you love something, you should love it done right. And in doing those stories and even putting out that controversy at the end of the day is supposed to, get people to be accountable for their actions and do a better job.
So what was your experience like as a student journalist at Nebraska?
Well, when I was at the Daily Nebraskan, we were, I know this is kind of hard to believe, but we were winning national championships, the football team. I know it's hard to get your head in that space. But there was a lot of controversy involving the football team, involving some of the players who were getting in trouble with the law and accusations of various things. And one of the stories that I love to tell, and I know Jeff Seline loves to tell it as well, but there was a lot of blowback on the Daily Nebraskan. I was working for the Daily Nebraskan at the time for some of the coverage that we were providing of the football team at the time. And at one point, Coach Tom Osborne banned us from covering practice. And we, realizing what the law was and what our rights were, and that we're a public university, we knew this could not stand. And I was not, as you mentioned, I was not a sports reporter. I was not someone who covered practice. I was not someone who ever even went over into the athletic department. But Zeleny says he looked around the room and he found the one person that he thought Tom Osborne could not say no to. Not because I was intimidating, but because I was probably this tiny little, freshman, that we sent over, into the lion's den. But he said, go over there and go to practice and don't let them kick you out. And sure enough, I did, and established that we were, and this ended up becoming a national story. And I just remember two things. One, I never met Tom Osborne in person. I remember him being ridiculously tall. And then second, I think his initial response to me was more to laugh and be like, just the fact that I was there, and so, but we ended up being allowed back to cover practice, and I thought that was an important moment. I know there was a lot of controversy surrounding that, but just the idea that you know what your rights are, and you have an obligation to report on things even if they're uncomfortable. And that was and then throughout the rest of my time at the Daily Nebraskan, I covered a lot of university administration. I remember a lot of crime. It was a great proving ground for a journalist, and it was also a great place to get clips then to use to get internships, and then those internships to get a job afterwards. So it was. I had a fantastic experience here.
It's interesting, the moment you talk about with Coach Osborne and that day that Jeff sent you over to the football practice seems like it's a foundational moment for your entire career, though.
It really tested, you asked about one of the reasons I got into journalism, and it kind of goes back to, I when I was younger, I was so ridiculously shy. And when I was in high school, being part of the student newspaper, it like gave me cover to approach people and talk to them. And that was always still a struggle. And so when he called on me, there was still a bit of that timid, like, oh my gosh, can I really do this? And that moment just really empowered me for, I would say for the rest of my career. You're right. It was really a foundational moment, and it was one that built my courage and also my resolve to do that work.
I still want to go through your career just a little bit before we get to your time at ESPN and some of the things that you've done and the state of journalism today as you see it. But when you got that first job as an education reporter in St. Joe, Missouri, what was it like to walk into that newsroom for the first time when all those friends you had made and you'd done so many great things together at the Daily Nebraskan? Now you're kind of on your own, trying to make your own way in the journalism business. What was that experience like?
I think that, I ended up choosing that route more because of a personal circumstance than professional, which is a whole other bit of advice I would give to I'd give to students. But I think that was a small enough newsroom that it was actually a good thing for me because I was given an entire beat. I'm just literally out of college, and given this entire beat that covered this massive part of Northwest Missouri, and I was forced to develop sources and to determine what the stories were, and just the independence that I was given in a newsroom like that. There's not a lot of people to back you up. You are the person. If something happens on that beat, you are responsible for it. And I think being in that environment and being given that ability to have that ownership and to do things that maybe I wouldn't have been able to do had I gone into a bigger newspaper right away was great. It really helped me develop my skills. That's where I really started to develop my data journalism skills, and I had the ability to play around and do things with data on schools and school performance, and I really and I did. I like that environment, and I had great editors, and I will say that was one thing throughout my entire career. I've been incredibly fortunate in having some pretty amazing editors at wherever I went. So
you go from St. Joe, Tacoma, Dallas, Des Moines, and all within the first decade of your career. How is it that you then, admittedly, as you told me, I didn't have a background in sports, and just 10 years in, how do you find yourself at ESPN, or how does ESPN find Paula Levine to bring you in the fold for the last 18 years?
So when I was in Dallas, I was one of a couple data journalism reporters. I was covering, doing investigative reporting, doing a lot of reporting on growth and development, and our Metro editor at the time was a guy named Dwayne Bray. And Dwayne had been the sports editor in Dallas, and Morning News had a phenomenal sports section, but he was the Metro editor. And then he was hired by ESPN to come and work primarily for the show Outside the Lines, and head up a television-based investigative unit. And one of the things that he wanted in that unit was someone who had data journalism, investigative reporting skills, also someone who could help with public records and government transparency, all of that stuff. And so he I was the only person I think that he had worked with me. He knew what I could do, and so he literally calls me up one day and is like, "Hey, I've got this unit I've got at ESPN, and I really thought you did really great work in Dallas, and I'd like you to come and join us." And so I applied to the job description that I kind of wrote up, and then joined an incredible group of journalists at the time. I mean, Dwayne was picking people from publications across the country, people who had covered the steroids scandal, concussions. We had a, and we still do, a phenomenal group of people. Our mission and our platform has sort of changed, and we can get into that when we talk about changes in the industry, because what our unit does now is very different from what it did back then when we had the Outside the Line show. But that's how I ended up there. It was, and it's been the greatest. As I was thinking about this, as he was making this offer, not only had I never worked in sports, I'd never worked in television, and I was coming into a job that was designed primarily to be on air, and so. But I was like, there's no way, I can't pass this up. This is a national platform I loved working with Dwayne in Dallas, and I was like, I cannot pass this up. I would regret it if I did, and it was the best career decision I ever made.
So to go from the beginning of your career in a very small newspaper in St. Joe, Missouri, then to have all of the resources of ESPN at the ready, what was that transition like, and what is it to work for an enterprise where you do have so many resources around the globe, but you're also reaching, what'd you tell me, 23 million people that have the ESPN app that can read your work at any one time. So to go from such a small market to the worldwide leader, what was that like, and what's it been like in recent years?
I mean, it was a gradual transition. I mean, every newspaper was, got a little bit bigger, and the morning news, at least at the time, was one of the larger metro papers in the nation. So like the resources thing had been building up, but we are in such a unique spot at ESPN, and we are so fortunate to have the resources we have. I mean, we are, I don't want to say limited, but we do, all of our stories are sports, right? But we really push that to the very edge. Like and you asked many of my colleagues in the unit, like we'll find an interesting story about some issue, and we'll be like, okay, how can we make that? Is there anyone in there who's an athlete or a former coach or whatever? And I will say this, like one of I think the absolute best stories written about the shooting at Parkland, the school in Florida, was done by my colleague Elizabeth Merrill, also a Nebraska native, and it was because she got access into that story because there was a coach and there was an athlete who was involved in victims of the shooting. And that was all it took. And I mean, I would say that the piece she did is hands down by far like the best coverage of that best narrative out of that tragic incident. And so I don't ever see it as being limited by sports, right? And we have, we report on a global stage. Like I do stories in small college towns. I've gone to Cuba to do stories before. I've been all over the country. So that part of it is really attractive because the ability to have that global reach and to do pieces on whether it's corruption in corruption in like FIFA or corruption in youth football in South Florida. It's great to have that reach and to have that scope. And then also being at a place where we do have the resources to do it.
What is the line like then to walk when you are at an entity like ESPN, where the company has a financial interest in the NFL, the NBA, the SEC, the ACC, so many other global entities that there is a financial business side of it, yet we have this unit over here with people like Elizabeth Merrill and Paula Levine, and back in the day, Bob Lee, who headed up Outside the Lines and one of the great sports journalists of the last 30, 40 years. How do you walk the line between business and journalism?
That's a question I get a lot, and I will have to say, it's not something that we take lightly, and I think we have done, our unit, and I think ESPN in general has done a good job of maintaining our integrity as journalists and reporting, and you can see it. I mean, we've done stories, even after this partnership with the NFL, we've done stories critical of the NFL. And, I've even had a interaction with the NFL after that where I was like, I don't necessarily care what the relationship is. Like, these are my questions for you, and I'm not backing off of it, so you're gonna deal with it. But
I stood up to Tom Osborne when I was 18 years old. I can handle Roger Goodell, right?
But it's a valid question, and I will say that there are sensitivities. There are, we have to be aware of them. We don't want to blindside anybody at our network when something's coming out like that. So it's a line that we walk and that we're aware of. But I will say for myself personally, it has not stopped me from doing any of the reporting that I do. The thing that I think is hardest, at least for me personally as a journalist, is like when you do something and someone, and this is so present with college sports fans, but you do something and someone's like, oh, the only reason you did that story was because your network has a relationship with the, the conference that our rival team is in. Like I will never forget when my colleague Mark Schleba and I were doing all the reporting on Baylor and the sexual assault scandal there with Art Briles and Ken Starr and all of that. We had all of these people on social media saying the only reason you're doing this reporting is so you can bolster the Longhorn network. I'm like, well, that didn't work. Which is associated with the University of Texas, and I just thought it was comical because that clearly wasn't the case, and then that clearly had no effect on the Longhorn network or the University of Texas. But there were people out there who thought, you are trying to drag down a rival program because you want to do well by the teams or the leagues that are your business partners, which is completely bogus.
Well, clearly you had done great work in that first decade of your career to get to ESPN, but it was that Baylor story. What, about 3 years after you started at ESPN, 2011 thereabouts, or 12?
Oh, it was 2015.
2015?
Yeah,
was it longer?
2015. Yeah, it was
That's
longer.
the one, though, where Paula Levine's name and investigative journalism really came to the forefront, no matter the genre. It didn't have to be a sports story. This was a very serious story. It could just happen to be college football's platform. How did that story all come about, and how did it become such a big story for you in your career?
So it came about initially because of some reporting that we were seeing, some reporting by Texas Monthly, actually. They did a story on how there was a player, Samu Kuachu, who was accused of sexual assault, who was convicted in a criminal case, but earlier had been cleared by a university Title IX investigation. And the oddity with that is that, as we all know, in a criminal case, you need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but in a Title IX case, the burden of proof is much lower. So it's like, how could that have happened? And so we thought that was odd. Everybody thought that was odd. And so Mark and I were taking a closer look then at, well, is this, this isn't the only time this has happened, because although it didn't get much coverage, there was a prior football player, Tevin Elliott, who had been convicted of sexual assault and had a number of women who had accused him. And so what I did, it actually started off as a data story. We took the names of all of the football players over the last, I can't remember, X number of years. Also got the database from some of the more than one law enforcement agency in and around Waco, and we ran all of those names against all the cases that had been reported, and we came up with several other football players and cases that never went anywhere. And then we were able to reach out to the women in those cases to find out how they had been treated by the university, and then the lawsuits started being filed. And then at the same time, the university had hired this company called Pepper Hamilton to do this investigation, and all of this came to our reporting, what we were exposing, what they were looking into the allegations that we were reporting on, all resulted in May of 2016, the university firing Art Briles, demoting Ken Starr as the president. He later resigns, and same with the athletic director. And it was huge. I mean, and it remains. I mean, that literally to this day, I'm getting emails on things with Baylor and with some of the former people there, and Ken Starr's name was in the Epstein files at Baylor. So it's this long-running saga. But as a result of that, you had several women who came forward, several lawsuits that were filed. The university ended up having to, in addition to the personnel changes, ended up having to make all of these changes and spend all this money on Title IX, and it was, some of the cases, most of the cases were settled. Some of them actually went to trial. I mean, it resulted, the tentacles of that were massive, and it resulted in changing so many people's lives, and also, sending a message to these programs and these coaches that, you're not going to get away with this.
How satisfying is it to this day? It wasn't one story, it was a project, and you wrote a book. But how satisfying is it that one journalism project that you worked on continues to have an impact and ripples after you threw the rock in the pond?
Oh, I mean, it's the thing that after Mark Schleba and I wrote the book, it was, that really like there was a sense of permanence about that. Like I still get people today saying, oh, I came across the book and gosh, I this gave me the power at my own university to come forward. Like I got an email like, I don't know, a couple months ago from a woman who was a victim at Baylor who was emailing me and saying, how much my reporting like changed her life and it made her able to come forward and like hearing things about that and knowing how, and it's not just the traffic that we get and the readers and viewers and listeners and everyone, but it's like hearing from these women whose lives you've changed forever, and the number of women who felt like the transparency of that and the calling out of the bad actors made them whole. Like that's like you can't get any, I think, better satisfaction on something like that when you see actual change being made because of something you did, and people telling you that your reporting has changed their lives and has made them better, or has made their lives better, have made influenced them in some way. Like that, those things are it is incredibly gratifying to know that the reach of that continues.
So do you love journalism, or do you have reverence for journalism?
I think both. I mean, I love journalism, and I have deep respect for the power of the Fourth Estate. I believe that we have. One of the things that I remember from my high school journalism class was one of the things that said in our textbook was, you don't need a license to be a journalist. You don't need a license to do this, and so you are bound by the obligation you have as being a reporter, as being someone who you are not. It's not just a job. You fulfill a role in society, and I take that very seriously. Do
you feel like you're a caretaker for journalism?
A caretaker?
When Paula Levine's byline shows up on a story, people will pay attention, right? I mean, around here we talk about, she's one of ours, Paula Levine. When Paula Levine reports on a story, it's a little bit like 60 Minutes, back in the day, that there's some respect that goes with your work. So do you feel as if though you are somebody who needs to keep that reverence for the Fourth Estate going?
Well, I think in that sense I do. I mean, it's part of why I like talking to students. It's part of why I like being mentor to some of the younger employees. Like I do. I feel like whatever we can do to encourage more people to do this and encourage respect for the craft as well is an obligation that we have.
Part of the craft, and you've mentioned it 2 or 3 times already, is data journalism. What is data journalism? How did that come about, and how do you use it in your everyday work?
So again, I don't know where he is, I have to give credit to Matt Waite, who inspired me on this. I'm obligated to do that. I think every time I do that, like he gets some sort of royalty or something like that. But from going back even to at the Daily Nebraskan, like watching and sort of watching him do this crime story. I mean, it was sort of watching what could have been an anecdotal story be like rock solid. And when you have numbers and you have data to back up to basically prove what you are finding is so much stronger than just what so many people do. You interview 3 people and here's a trend, right? And people, it's also, you can't discount it, right? I mean, if you can go through and say, I've analyzed 10 years of records, and this is the trend, and here's the relationship. Like you can't argue with that. Like it's rock solid, and being able to do that type of reporting. So I'll give you an example. So one of the things that people debated for years was, why do these athletes, why there's so much reporting on these athletes in these Title IX cases, like you're just picking on these guys and they're not really, they don't really get called out more than other people. I said, you want to debate that? Let's fine. I don't want to sit here and do stories about whether you're right or wrong. Let's pull the data. Let's look at it. And so we did. We pulled from as many schools as we could, the data on the number of Title IX complaints, and of those, how many involved athletes. And the data showed that they were far more likely to be named as a respondent in a Title IX complaint than a regular student. And so there you go. That's it. Like there's your answer.
So as you continue to learn the craft of journalism, how much has data journalism become almost foundational in an era where the profession is often scrutinized? There's a decreasing amount of trust in journalism in certain circles. If you can rely on data journalism, how much does that help to restore and build trust in those who bring the news to us every day?
I mean, I hope it does. I hope that when people see that we spent the time to run the numbers and to do the work, that they'll be like, okay, this is something I can, we did a piece just last year about NFL athletes and their state of retirement, and I like to think that people read that and they know we spent all this time to do this survey and we ran all this, so you can trust us when we tell you that this is what they're saying, this is how they are. I mean, there's a lot of wanting to sort of push some of the stuff under the rug, but like, this is the truth, right? And I would like to do more data work than I do, so often, and I'm sure, we've talked about this, and I'm sure you talk about this in your class, like it's hard sometimes to make those stories accessible, especially on a visual format and so forth. So, but I like to think that, when you can do that, it brings a level of credibility. Not only does it bring a level of credibility, but it tells people, like, we really worked hard on this. Like, we really spent our time on this. Like, we wanted to get to the truth on this, and we show our work, right? Like, here's what we did. So you can see, okay, this isn't just, like I said, 3 people saying something and we're gonna call it a trend.
Well, oftentimes when you watch a television news program now, you see 3 different people on the screen. You've got the left, you've got the moderator, you've got the center, you've got opinion journalism, you have personality journalism now. Who's saying it the loudest? As somebody from your position, what is it like to be in that medium? Because you did say when you got to ESPN, you'd never done television before. Obviously, after 18 years, you've had an opportunity to experience it from that side. So what do you think of the state of journalism in that regard, and who's bringing the news, doing the journalism, and how they're doing it? What does it say about the state of the business today?
It has been interesting watching coming out of here in the late 90s was still really in the era of mass media, right? Like as we say, you had to go to certain sources to get your news. You had to go to the newspaper. You had to watch one of 3 networks, and it was easier to force people to read the stories that were important. I mean, we call it like, you have to eat your vegetables, right? And I think as with social media, with the internet, which has brought a lot of great things to being able to communicate and being able to allow people who wouldn't have had a voice before have a voice, it's completely fractured that. And it has completely fractured how people consume their news. Like I said, start off by saying, I was brought into ESPN to be on Outside the Lines, which was a daily news show. We had a weekend show that was a little more in depth, and that was, and that is no more, because you don't consume news. You don't consume, like, people weren't going at a certain time of day to sit down and watch Outside the Lines. And so now it was, okay, so how do we, for those of us doing, in-depth journalism, how do we get our stories out when there is so much competition from the flashy, the arguing, the debate, the hot takes, all of that? Like, how do we reach our audience, and how do we reach them where they are? Because we can't make people eat their vegetables anymore. So one of the things that, and this is maybe going a little bit farther from where your question is, but one of the things that we think about when we're putting something together is, like, how are all the different ways we can get this out to our viewers, our readers, our listeners? Like, do we have it in a written piece online? Do we have an app alert that goes out to the X number of millions of people? Do we have a social media campaign? Do we put together a TikTok video? Do we have a whole Instagram reel that we're doing for this? Do we make it into a podcast? Do we do a daily podcast? Do we do a series podcast? Do we do something, one of the other benefits that we have at ESPN is we're owned by Disney. So do we do something that we get our, spread it through? Can we get it on Hulu? Do we do something with ABC News? So all of these different things we're trying now in terms of when you think about delivering your message. It's not just I'm going to write this story, or I'm going to do this broadcast, or I'm going to I'm going to do a podcast today. It's like you have to reach people where they are, and you have to reach them in many different ways.
Do you have to strategize about the resistance you're going to get when you're about to approach a story, given that there is so much in media relations and public relations, personal representatives, and all those who might be running a front for the subject of the story you might be investigating? So anticipate how they're going to respond, who's going to respond, what those personalities might be like. Does that also come into the strategy of putting a story together?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you think about, okay, you got to do this, and if you have the ability to pick when you're doing a story, if it's not just on one person, you have the ability to pick, okay, here's what I'm going to go after for this topic or whatever. It's like, so, who do I think is going to be more open and forthcoming, and who, whose media people are just impossible to deal with. And one other thing, like I do a lot with public records, right? And so a lot of times if we're trying to do something that's kind of an issue story, we'll look at, okay, well, what teams, whether they're professional teams or college teams, what teams are in what states where the public records laws make it easier for us to get what we want versus somewhere else. So that's not great because those other places get a pass, unfortunately. But that's something we think about. Is like, okay, when we look at if we have the ability to do that, where can we go where there are fewer barriers? But that doesn't stop us from if that one person is the subject of it, going hard at that. I mean, we will go hard at it, and we'll one of the things that I know is frustrating in sports is when I reach out directly to an athlete, or I'll reach out directly to an employee, and I get this message from an SID saying, in the future, if you want to talk to an athlete, you have to go through me. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're not my editor? So no, I'm not going to do that. Like if I want to talk to an athlete, I'm going to call the athlete directly, but thanks, appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to ask her a story real quick. Think about some of the favorite ones, but one of my favorite topics is, but we're going to open up the floor for a Q&A here in just a moment. So the microphone is in the back, and I think they may be bringing it up here to the front. So we'll get the audience participation, but one quick story, I want to ask you about this. Gambling on Florida Little League sports. That had to have been you've got to be kidding me. This is a story?
Oh,
what was
crazy.
that like to cover? Because that just seems outrageous.
So it was the greatest combination of things. We got a call. We had done a story about, it involved gambling. It wasn't about gambling. It involved gambling. And I got a call from some random person who said he used to coach in South Florida. And he's like, if you think gambling and whatever that is bad, you need to see what's going on in South Florida. And that was it. That was all there was to youth. He said youth football in South Florida. That was it. And so we pursued that story. That was wild. We had undercover hidden camera video. We would sit in the stands at these football games, and we would see we got people in the stands, handing money to each other. I think the best part of it was one of the coaches who we had interviewed about this, who was saying, oh, there's a zero tolerance for gambling in the league, zero tolerance, we don't put up with it. He was one of the guys we caught on camera gambling, and so we had the video, and the thing was, he was you could tell because he had these really distinct sunglasses, and so we interviewed him once in his office, then we caught him on video, and so we brought him back to the studio because we said we wanted to interview him a second time. And I said, so you have a zero tolerance? Yeah, zero tolerance. We don't tolerate any of that. And I said, well, can I show you some video? And I'm playing it for him. He's sitting there and he's watching himself. I said, what are you doing with that? What are you doing with what he's and I mean, my God, his reaction was just it was the classic gotcha moment. And I will give him credit. He did not get up out of the chair and take off. He waited, and I asked him several times, and he said, well, I was just holding money for the people who are gambling. And I'm I said, how does that work in a zero tolerance? So you're not doing it, but you're facilitating it. So I don't think you can walk that line, but yeah. So.
I had to read that one twice. That to me was too much, betting on Little League sports in Florida. So, all right, let's open up. The microphone is in the back right now, but if you have a question, make your way to it and introduce yourself and Paula is prepared to answer whatever you have. So
Allegedly prepared.
yeah. Mic's on? All right. Who's first? Come on.
Hi, I'm Abby. Bill always says we have the right to write and not the right to be wrong. Have you ever been wrong in a story you've written? How did you go about that? How do you fact check what you write? Anything kind of like that.
All right. Thank you, Abby. Have I ever been wrong? I mean, there have been errors in story, like names or dates or whatnot, but I don't think, in fact, I would not think, I know in terms of like when we have published a story, like we've not just completely screwed something up. I mean, I feel like you don't go to publication, you don't go to airing until you're dead to rights. So I would say, you know, there clearly, and there are people though who, especially college sports fans, because they are a passionate group, who will say, oh, well, you know, you screwed this up or you did this, but you take them, you can go through, okay, well, if you believe that, let's go line by line and find me one thing in here that's wrong. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, you may not like someone's opinion of somebody else, but it's still right. So, you know, so we've, fortunately, I've not had to deal with that. But the second part of your question is like vetting people. I mean, I think that is so important. And we will I mean, that was one of the things that I do for our group is like I maintain a lot of the resources that we use for backgrounding people. And I tell people, I don't care if it's an investigative story or if it's a feature, like you need to vet everybody. I mean, when I was doing the stories on the Title IX stuff with the women coming forward, I backgrounded the women because you never know, you know, and so, but it's only fair. And we've had people before who were ready to do some big feature story, totally benign, like, you know, happy-go-lucky story, and they were like, we want to profile this person, and we just want to make sure, you know, whatever. And you find out, this isn't what you find out that he's, you know, had some child sex offense. Like, yeah, we're gonna pass on that. So, but that, yeah, you do not want to be in that situation either. So, I encourage whether it's a you know, a fluff feature piece or whether it's an investigative piece, backgrounding your people is crucial.
Hi, I'm Costa. I wanted to know, with the expanding use of generative AI, how do you see it affecting investigative journalism as things evolve, as things progress?
Well, thank you. You need to stick around for the AI panel afterwards. We'll be discussing this. But so not to take away from that, but I would just say, you know, there's the idea of using AI on the input and the output. And the input, I think I've been using it more in terms of on reporting and making it easier to comb through information, to get information. I think like I said, well, I know the panel will discuss this a lot more. There's a lot to be discussed yet on using AI in terms of the final product and where it's appropriate to do that and where it's not. And so I will leave that for the whole discussion we're going to have later. But yeah, it is something that we talk about on a regular basis, and it's you know, it is absolutely a pressing concern. But like I said, I encourage people to use it on the reporting side in terms of automating a lot of things that were tedious, that, you know, especially when you're working with data, when you're working with a lot of documents, there's a lot that AI can do that can help you on that end of things.
My name is Logan Mosley. You're on the forefront of a lot of controversial issues. Has there ever been a time where you wish you could change the angle of your story or just slightly tweak some of the information? Why or why not?
There hasn't been a time, thank you for the question. There hasn't been a time when I wanted to change the angle of a story. There have been times where I'd be like, oh, you know, I'm getting criticism on this certain thing. I had this piece of information. I wish I would have put it in there because it would have made it more clear. But there's never been a time where because of blowback, I'd be like, oh, I don't want to. I wish I wouldn't have done that. Like that has not happened.
Hi, my name's Charlie Decker, and what ultimately decides if you run a story? Because as you're saying, for the gambling one, you basically got a call, then started covering it, and then kind of a two-step. What also can ultimately end a story that you want to cover?
I think what decides whether you pursue a story or whether you run with a story is, can you do it? Is there a story? First of all, is there a story? And for us, it's, is there a story? Is it big enough for ESPN to do? I mean, does it have a larger tail? Is it enough of a investigation that warrants us, bringing light to it? And is it something that we can get at? And sometimes you don't know that going in. I mean, there was a story that I was pursuing a couple of years ago where there was a lot of information, and I went down the road for several months on interviewing people and getting data and so forth. But at the end of the day, I was like, it's just not, it's just not there. And you don't ever just abandon it. I put it aside and I'm like, you know what, if this situation, if this person, if this comes up again and there's more to it, then I'll come back and visit it. But right now, it's just not rising to the level of a story. And the other thing is, I don't make those decisions alone. Like, I mean, I make those decisions with my editors, with other reporters if we're working on a project. So it's not something where you're just sitting in there and debating this on yourself. Like that's the great thing about working somewhere where I do, is like you have several colleagues you can bounce this off of, and then you have your editors who all say different things, but all have different perspectives that you can weigh, and so you can make this decision as a group, not just weighing on whether you think it's going to work or not.
Hello, my name is Joshua DiFiore. My question for you today is there any unique skill sets as a journalist / reporter that it's important to pick up that may not be so apparent?
Okay. Well, the first thing I will say, because we've talked about it before, is learning the data journalism part of this and statistics and data. Thank you. Oh boy, I'm worried about your question.
We don't have to answer it.
And the other thing I always say, and I think I said this in our conversation the other day, I always tell people, learn a second language, because that will, especially in sports. I mean, you look at you look at baseball, you look at soccer. Like there are and I remember when I was working in Tacoma, and Ichiro started with the Mariners, and we had a reporter who didn't cover sports, but he spoke fluent Japanese, and he was really the only one who was able to have conversations, because the other reporters didn't, and Ichiro was at that point that was a little not as comfortable with his English. So but yeah, I mean, there have been many times where, and I don't, I am not fluent in Spanish, but I know enough of it to get by. But I wish I were. I wish I had, when I went to Cuba, I had to have an interpreter come with me. It would have been nice not to do that. So, and you are at a point where you can take advantage of that. So that's why I always tell college students, learn a second language. Absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry, we're about out of time.
Yep, no more questions.
Do you want to take this one? Young man, introduce yourself.
I don't know.
It's innocent, I swear.
Okay.
As tempted as I am, and the voluminous material that I've got, what has always impressed me about your career, and something I want you to talk about to these students, is that you didn't just make a leap from print to television. You jumped into national television with, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, very little to no experience with that at all. In your time at ESPN, you have done a lot in sort of what we would describe as multimedia in the broadest sense. Podcasting, online, social, television. Where do you find the confidence to just do that? Because that, I think, is something that is very difficult for us to teach, but it is incredibly valuable for these students to learn.
Ooh. I'm going to have to Venmo you for that question later, the value of it. Yeah, okay, for not asking the other questions. Thank you, Matt. That was a very good question. I appreciate it. That gives me an opportunity to talk about something that is, I think, at the root of that, which is not being afraid of conflict and not being afraid of putting yourself out there, because developing that and developing that confidence to be on that massive stage comes from your very basic, where you are now, how comfortable you are with confronting people at a very individual level, and then realizing, also, well, two things. One is, and I say this because I see it with young people so often now, it just seems like there is a real aversion to conflict. And I don't know where that's from. I don't know if it's a pandemic holdover or whatever it is, but I think for a lot of people, they don't want to put themselves into a situation where someone's going to be mean to them or say no to them or, shut the door in their face. And like, part of why I like this is because I like to be in this, I like to be in those situations. Like someone says no to me and I'm like, nah, try again, And so trying to develop the confidence to know when you're right and when you have the right to be there and to ask the questions. Like that's what I think comes first. And then whether it's on a national stage or whether it's a student project, I mean, when you have your information locked up and when you have done the due diligence on your reporting and you have editors who are going to back you up as well, like all of those things together, like I was saying with someone else before, like when you go to publication, you go to air, you go to print, you need to be dead to rights, and you need to know that you can show your work and you can back things up, and that's what gives you the confidence, whether it's at ESPN, whether it's at the Daily Nebraskan, whether it's anywhere in between, to put yourself out there and to put your story out there and to stand behind it. And one of the things specifically at ESPN that has given me from day one, that has given me the confidence is I mentioned this earlier, I have phenomenal editors. I have producers, I have executives who stand behind the work that we do. I mean, when we, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Michigan State, whether it's Baylor, whether it's, any of the leagues, whether it's an individual in power, like I know, because I know I've done my work and I know that my work is good, my company is going to stand behind me. And to this, and I know that may sound a little Pollyanna, but like that's been my experience, and I really appreciate all the people who have done that, and all the people who, building up to that, who have been the fact checkers, have been the editors, have been the line editors, have been all those people whose eyes have also been on that. Like that's what gives me confidence to know that I know my work is good, I know good people have looked at my work, and I know that I'm at a place where they will stand up for what I've done. And and I appreciate that. But I think on an individual basis, where you really have to start with that is you cannot be afraid of conflict. You cannot be afraid if someone says no to tell them, yeah, I'm not going to accept that. That's not okay. And you need to understand that you are driven by your story, by your work. You're not, like I said with the example with the SID, and I know this is going to rub some people here the wrong way, but you don't work for them, right? And if it's an important story, there are times when the people who are the gatekeepers have an interest in telling you to go away because what the truth is not favorable to them. And that's their job, is to get you to go away. And if you believe in the truth, and if you want to do this work, and if you want to do it well, you need to know that you stand up for your right to ask those questions, your right to access that information, and you have to understand it will be uncomfortable. You will get blowback. You will have people who will tell you, if you do this, this thing will happen. And it might happen, but you still need to do it because that's your obligation. And like, I see so many people who it comes down to, even with like, well, I'll say this, like, because we talk about that example, like with the sexual assault reporting that I've done, I was giving a talk in Texas a while ago, and I had a woman ask me, well, how do you feel about asking these women about these assaults? Like, do you feel like you're victimizing them a second time by having them repeat this? And I said, well, I understand that's a concern. I said, first of all, I will tell you that don't ever assume that, because in my experience, almost all the time, the women appreciate someone listening to them and being able to tell their story, right? So don't assume that if something bad has happened to someone that they don't want to talk about it, because maybe they do, because maybe you're the first person who's ever really listened to them. But you also have to understand that, as I say to them, like, yeah, it may be uncomfortable for them, but none of us are entitled to a life of ease, right? Humanity is full of conflict and controversy and discomfort. And if you are doing it with the goal of pursuing the truth and holding someone accountable and getting at, doing something that you think will advance the issue, then, you need to take that step and do it, even understanding that, yeah, it might be uncomfortable and you might cause conflict and someone might call you a name and someone might hang up on you. All of those things will happen, but you still have to do it. And you just have to be prepared for it and have some thick skin. I mean, this is what this industry and what this occupation, and specifically investigative reporting, this is what this involves. So yeah, conflict is part of it and you can't shy away from it.
You mentioned when we talked on the phone yesterday that even in the last 10 years, the business has changed and the approach to your job. What do you see the journalism world changing into, or what changes do you see for the students who will be walking out of here in a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years? What will the world of journalism look like for them?
It is, it's a growth, and then it's a decline, but then it's like a replacement, right? So I think, we're probably at the end of the whole mass media, right? And as hard as that is, when you think about where you're going to go find a job, like those traditional places that you might have applied at before, like those jobs don't exist the way they used to. Especially if you're going to sports, like the Metro newspaper beat reporter jobs, like those are becoming fewer and fewer. But at the same time, you're seeing things like, I don't know how many of you guys, I hope you're familiar with the Flatwater Free Press, but you're seeing a lot of these grassroots organizations develop, different publications, whether it's investigative reporting, whether it's sports, and I think you're going to find you're not going to be going into those big entities. I mean, yes, ESPN, but even within ESPN, there's all of these different areas you can go into. I think you're going to see this be far more fractured, and part of that creates opportunity, but at the same time, are you going into a job and into a media outlet that is influenced in some way, or are you going somewhere where you can truly have a job and be objective? I think you will have opportunities. The opportunities will look very different. And then echoing something that I said earlier is, even a few years ago when I came to speak to a class, I remember asking a lot of the students, it's probably about 10 years ago. I remember asking them, what do you want to do? And 3 people said, I want to be a magazine writer. And I'm like, what's the last magazine you read? Oh, well, I don't read magazines. So why do it? So, you can't think about this industry going into, I'm going to do broadcast, I want to do, I want to write for a website. You need to be prepared to do all of it. You need to go into this knowing how to write, how to report on video, how to do podcasting, how to put together a social media campaign, all of that, because your job will likely change, right? My job, like I said, what I started doing when I first came here is changed dramatically in terms of the platform. One of the biggest thing I did in the last 12 months was a podcast, right? So you need to be prepared to deliver your story, your investigation, whatever it is, through multiple different means and multiple different media.
So before they walk out the door with that diploma in hand, what should these students be doing during their time in the co-JMC to maximize the opportunities they have right now to prepare them for whatever's on the other side?
I would just to again take advantage of all the different education you can get in all the different platforms, right? And get out. One of the things that I love about the J School is the whole idea from day one, right? Get out there, take the initiative. If you don't see if you don't see a job or an opportunity, create one. There's also the beauty of how things are different now. You don't have to wait for for someone to hire. You can go out and put your stuff out there and find a means, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's through wherever, and take the initiative. Really try to, as the advice in terms of getting a job now is the same as it was when I was coming out of here. You need to have something to show people, right? You need to have, whether it's however you tell your stories, whether you have a podcast, whether you have a long written investigation, take your time here to take advantage of all the opportunities to actually generate something that you can show to an employer, and take the initiative to even go beyond that and see if there are opportunities you can create elsewhere. Like I know when I was up in Omaha, there was a journalism student up there who, couldn't find an internship, but started doing a job going to different high school tournaments and taking photos and selling them to parents. Like that was a thing that didn't exist, but that's what I'm talking about. Take the initiative. If the job isn't out there and you see an opportunity, a need for reporting on something, or if it's a PR thing or whatever, create your opportunity, because you have the means here to do that.
Paula, great advice, great conversation. Thank you so much. Paula Levine. Our time has come to an end for the 2026 Seline Lecture. Thank you to our guests for joining us here in studio as well as on our live stream. Thank you to Paula Levine for being a respected role model, not only for the students at the COJMC, but also for professional peers everywhere. And of course, thank you to the Seline Family Foundation for making all of this possible. I'm Bill Dolman. We look forward to assembling again next year for the Seline Lecture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's College of Journalism and Mass Communications.